Hey there, night travelers. Tonight we're taking a scorching detour into one of the most iconic civilizations in history. You've seen the pyramids. You've heard the myths, but ancient Egypt wasn't just golden masks and divine dynasties. It was also sweat, dust, and an unrelenting sun that could turn your soul into beef jerky. So what would it really be like to live a single day in the land of the pharaohs? Spoiler: the sun won't be your friend, and neither will the Nile. Before we plunge into the past, take a second to like and subscribe, only if you actually enjoy stepping into history's grittier side, and drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love seeing how far across the sands this story travels. Now then, dim the lights, find a fan if you've got one, and settle in. We're headed back thousands of years to a place where gods ruled the heavens, and the climate wanted you dead. Welcome to ancient Egypt. Even before your eyes open, the sun is already declaring war. It pierces through your thatched reed hut, like Race himself is taking personal offense to your slumber. Curtains, luxury, air conditioning, fantasy. You're lying on a straw mat with a linen sheet that's barely more than a polite suggestion, and that cool Nile breeze those documentaries always mention. It packed up and left sometime around 2800 BC. You step outside, and it's not even mid-morning, but it's already flirting with 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 32 Celsius. The desert air hits you like a slap. Your linen tunic hangs limp and useless, as protective as a tissue in a sandstorm. Sunscreen, try crocodile dung. No, really, it was one of the few protective options for the lower classes. Ancient priests had scented oils and salves. But you're not a priest. You're just hoping mud and divine indifference will keep your skin from cooking off your bones. By noon, the ground beneath your feet could boil lentils. There's no shade. Trees are rare, and standing behind a mud brick wall only gives you a new angle to melt in. You're sweating like you've been stuffed into a kiln, but you don't dare complain, because in Egypt the sun is a god. Ra's radiance is divine judgment, and if you're blistering, well, it's considered a holy compliment. And this is just the beginning. Eventually you shuffle towards salvation. The Nile, Egypt's eternal lifeblood, the giver of crops, calendar, and culture, revered in hymns, carved in stone. But you smell it before you see it. The river carries a scent somewhere between a fish market and a sun-baked swamp. Frogs croak like they've got opinions. Flies swarm in thick clouds, and mystery creatures slither just beneath the surface. Still, this is your bath. There is no soap, not unless you're elite. So you turn to the ancient exfoliant of the gods. Sand. That's right. You scrub yourself with handfuls of gritty Nile silt, which is only marginally more effective than rubbing yourself with gravel. And regret. Laundry. Same spot. You beat your clothes against rocks and pray a crocodile doesn't take an interest in your tunic or your thigh. Oh, and the water. It's not just a bathtub. It's the village highway, garbage chute, and occasionally a funeral route. So yes, you're technically cleaner than before. Spiritually, it's debatable. If you live in a big city like Memphis or Thebes, you might have access to a public cistern. If not, it's Nile or nothing. You haul water jars on your head, navigating the slippery banks as the sun turns every surface into a skillet. The jars are heavy, the journey's exhausting, and yet, this is your daily ritual. Reverent, necessary, a little bit traumatic, cleanish. You return home for breakfast. Let's be clear. No omelets. No honey-drenched figs. No creamy goat cheese with mint. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't brunch. It's survival. You squat in a corner, maybe on a low stool if you're fancy, and you eat bread, and not the fluffy kind. This is hard, dense, gritty stuff, baked from barley or emmer wheat, often full of sand from the grinding stones. Every bite crunches like you're chewing through a sandstone souvenir. Alongside it, beer, but not the golden fizzy kind. Egyptian beer is a cloudy, lukewarm sludge, more like fermented oatmeal than refreshment. Children drink it too, not because they're rebellious, but because it's safer than Nile water. At least the brewing process kills some parasites. If you're lucky, you might get a pickled onion or a few shriveled dates. Protein is rare, unless someone caught a fish and didn't eat it raw before sharing. And flies, they're your breakfast companions. You swat them off your face while trying not to spill your beer porridge all over your lap. This isn't a meal, it's a pit stop before the day truly begins. Time for work, unless you're a priest, scribe, or royalty, which, let's face it, you're not. You're headed into the fields, or onto a construction site. Farming means wading ankle deep through sticky Nile mud, yanking out weeds, planting seeds, and trying not to collapse under the overseer's shrill demands. Your tools, crude wooden plows, stone sickles, and your own aching hands. Blisters mean you're doing it right, but if you're really unlucky, you're a laborer on one of the pharaoh's projects. That means dragging multi-ton stones for temples and tombs, barefoot, up dusty ramps in blazing heat, hoping the rock doesn't crush you mid-chant. And if you're chiseling a tomb for someone important, don't make mistakes. The dead may rest in peace, but workers who mess up don't. If you're a woman, you're grinding grain, weaving linen, hauling water, raising children, and still helping in the fields. Your day ends when your body does. And even then, probably not. And whatever you do, don't complain. Not even a muttered "this job stinks." Because in Egypt, the pharaoh isn't just your boss. He's a god, the living embodiment of Horus, the divine link between earth and sky. To grumble is to risk blasphemy, and blasphemy earns whips, shackles, or worse, a one-way ticket to the underworld without your burial goods. You'll never see him. He lives behind palace walls, surrounded by gold, scribes, and officials. His face is carved into every wall, his name echoed in every temple. You serve him because that's your purpose, and pretending to be honored by the privilege is far safer than saying otherwise. And then, there's the sand. It's in your clothes, your bed, your bread, your mouth, your very soul. Sand is the true ruler of ancient Egypt. It wears you down like water over stone. Gusts of wind whip it across your face like nature's cruelest exfoliant. Your linen tunic, it holds sand, the way a sponge holds water. You can't escape it, you can only accept it. And that's just one day. So the next time you imagine walking like an Egyptian, remember, their stride was probably a limp from stone bruises, heat stroke, and sand rash. Now what part of ancient Egypt would you not survive? The sun, the food, the job market run by gods? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear your take. And until next time, may your sandals stay intact, your beer slightly less chunky, and your soul just dry enough to make it through tomorrow. Welcome to history. It hurts a little. First, understand this. In ancient Egypt, the gods aren't distant beings you visit in a temple once a week. They are everywhere, all the time, woven into the fabric of daily life, like sand in your sandals. Your town doesn't just have one temple, it has a dozen, each devoted to a different deity, with a very specific job. There's Ra, the sun god, driving his celestial barge across the sky, like the universe's most punctual Uber driver. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, handles scribes, moon calendars, and likely your tax returns. So Beck, half crocodile, half nightmare, keeps watch over the Nile. And Bastet, graceful, sly, feline, serves as the goddess of protection and domestic harmony. In short, she's the divine PR manager. Your freedom, optional. Your devotion, mandatory. Before you even sit down to eat, you'd better offer a bit to the gods. Before you sleep, a prayer to Set might help keep your home from being tossed into cosmic chaos. Stub your toe and let out a curse. Be careful, it might attract the wrong spirit's attention. Even your funeral isn't your own. Death kicks off a multi-day trial, where your soul must prove itself, avoiding demons, passing tests, and praying it was good enough to avoid eternal erasure. And speaking of death, oh, you don't just die. You enter a waiting room of eternity, with paperwork. First, there's the weighing of your heart against the feather of might, the principle of truth and order. Live an honest life, you're fine. Steal a goat, cheat your neighbor, or curse your mother-in-law. Your heart's heavier, and that means you get eaten by Amit, 1/3 lion, 1/3 crocodile, 1/3 hippo, all parts terrifying. Annihilation, no afterlife, no second chance, just gone. But the Egyptians didn't fear this system, they embraced it. It was comforting, a roadmap to a just cosmos. Follow the rituals, uphold might, and your reward was eternal paradise, family, food, calm waters, and a boat ride through the field of reeds. Of course, the richer you were, the more noticed you were by the gods. Temples towered like divine skyscrapers. Priests wielded enormous influence. Peasants, they just prayed someone upstairs was in a good mood. Still, this deep spiritual investment came with perks, like one of the most advanced medical systems of the ancient world. Although, calling it medical might be generous. Let's say you step on something sharp. Maybe you've been bitten by something with too many legs. In ancient Egypt, that's Tuesday. Time to see a doctor, which means a healer, a magician, and an optimist, all rolled into one. You're brought to someone with surgical tools and a collection of scrolls. Yes, they understand anatomy. Yes, they know how to stitch wounds and drain abscesses, but they'll also recite incantations and hang charms around your neck, because maybe that rash isn't from heat, it's from a ghost clinging to your spleen. Your ointment might include honey grate, it's antibacterial, moldy bread, early penicillin, and crushed herbs. But before it's applied, a priest murmurs a protective spell, just in case. Got a headache, onion paste to the scalp, chest pain, cow dung and dates, eye infection, lizard blood, ochre, beer, and a desperate prayer to Horus. There were surgeries, yes, but no anesthesia. Just grit your teeth and scream into a mud brick while someone sits on your shoulders. Dentistry, a horror story. Bread was filled with sand, and by your 20s, your teeth were ground to dust. If one went bad, you could either live with it, die from it, or let a blacksmith turned dentist yank it out with metal tongs and prayers. And all this magic wasn't superstition, it was security. The invisible could kill you just as fast as the visible. So every sneeze, every groan, every birth came with a chant and a charm. Egyptian medicine had its moments of brilliance, but at its heart was belief in the gods, in magic, and in hope. Which brings us to a surprise. Women in ancient Egypt had more rights than many women for thousands of years after. They could own property, run businesses, file for divorce, and sue their husbands. No joke. The legal documents exist. On paper, a woman in ancient Egypt had autonomy, but let's not romanticize it. Legal status doesn't mean an easy life. A typical woman wakes before dawn, grinding grain with a stone that chews through wheat and vertebrae alike. Then it's off to the river to haul water, cook for the family, tend the garden, raise children, feed livestock, and help in the fields. She is a workforce in a linen dress. No spa days, no maternity leave, no relaxing harp music during childbirth, just incense, midwives, and hope. Birth is dangerous. If you survive, you're back to work within days. Fashion, sure, they wore cosmetics, lead-based and applied with sticks. Clothes, linen, breathable, yes, but no underwear, no shoes, and no relief from the sun or the sand or the flies. If you're lucky enough to be upper class, you might manage estate accounts or even become a priestess. If you're royalty, you could be pharaoh, like Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, women of steel wills and impeccable eyeliner. But if you're poor, the law says you're free, but your body knows better. You bend, lift, grind, birth, bury, and pray every day. Comfort is for statues, survival is for you. Let's say you somehow make it through another day, dodging sandstorms, grinding flour, thanking Ra, and keeping Set at bay. You think it's time to rest. Not quite. Because death isn't peace, it's a paperwork apocalypse. Your soul enters the Hall of Ma'at, where 42 gods wait for you to recite your innocence. I did not lie, I did not cheat, I did not steal my neighbor's goat. One wrong word, one forgotten line, and that's it. And it eats your soul, gone, forever. It's not judgment, it's a final exam with eternal consequences. If you pass, you reach the field of utopia, with crops, boats, family, and maybe fewer mosquitoes. If you fail, well, you don't just die, you vanish from existence. Egyptians were obsessed with preparing for this. They built tombs,
They wrote spells. They copied passages from the Book of the Dead, like spiritual cheat codes, to get every word right when it mattered most. And in all this, there is one small mercy: linen. Blessed, breathable linen. Your only defense against the Egyptian sun. Your outfit is always the same for men: a short white kilt. For women, a linen dress. If you're rich, maybe some pleats, maybe some beads. If not, just fabric and faith. Laundry is done in the Nile, hopefully without a crocodile joining in. Shoes, optional. Most go barefoot, unless you're a priest or it's a special day. Bugs don't care what you're wearing, they're coming anyway. Yes, eyeliner helps against sun glare. Yes, amulets offer protection. But mostly, you are sweating, swatting, and praying that your linen doesn't melt into your skin by noon. There are no seasons here, just hot, and slightly less hot. And so you survive another scorched day. You haul bricks, you endure, you pray. But in ancient Egypt, life is never guaranteed. Most don't live past 35. Childhood diseases, infections, childbirth, wild animals, heat, anything can end you.
If you make it past infancy, adulthood hits by 13. You marry young. You work hard. You die early. But even as death looms, you don't despair. You plan. You prepare. You save for your tomb like it's your eternal vacation home. Because in Egypt, survival is fleeting. But eternity, that's what you're really living for. Gold amulets, jeweled rings, perfumed oils, carved statues, chests overflowing with fine linens, and in the case of pharaohs, literal boatloads of treasure. These weren't gifts, they were supplies, essentials for eternity. The afterlife, in ancient Egypt, was no vague spiritual realm. It was a fully stocked parallel world, where the dead needed to eat, dress, sail, and live forever. But all this wealth, piled inside tombs, that was like leaving the door open and hanging a sign. Valuables inside. Thieves welcome. Tomb robbery wasn't some rare blasphemy. It was an industry. Pharaohs fought back. They buried themselves deep within remote cliffs, sealed their tombs behind trap doors, and plastered the walls with terrifying curses. May a crocodile devour your soul, or may your limbs twist for eternity in the coils of a serpent made of fire. But curses, no matter how poetic, didn't stop thieves. They came anyway, under cover of night, armed with chisels, shovels, and most importantly, inside information. Sometimes they were locals, sometimes they were the very workers who helped build the tombs, and sometimes, disturbingly, even the priests and guards took part. The punishments were brutal: public beatings, exile, mutilation, or death. But the risk was worth it. Gold, incense, even linen, it was all precious. And the dead, well, they didn't fight back. But here's what might surprise you. It wasn't just royal tombs that were violated. Even the graves of commoners were fair game. A poor farmer might be buried with a humble pot of beer, or a small loaf of bread, still enough to tempt someone desperate. Food was scarce, tools were valuable, and linen, it was as good as cash. Sometimes robbing the dead wasn't about greed, it was about survival. Egypt endured famines, invasions, and social collapse. A starving father might enter a tomb not seeking treasure, but dinner. When your children are crying from hunger, a funerary offering stops looking like a sacred object and starts looking like survival. So in ancient Egypt, death was not a guarantee of peace. A tomb was only as secure as its secrecy. If your name was found, it could be erased. If your mummy was found, it could be unwrapped, looted, and left to the elements. In the end, rest was not a right. It was a privilege, one most didn't get. And yet those same tombs, desecrated or not, left behind something else, something haunting, something beautiful. The walls, they speak in symbols: strange birds, coiled snakes, outstretched hands, and sideways men, frozen mid-step, like they're posing for an eternal fashion show. These are not mere decorations. These are ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, majestic, mysterious, maddening. They weren't just art. They were an entire language, a full-blown writing system made up of over 700 characters, with more invented over time.
Some symbols stood for whole words, others for individual sounds. Still others were determinatives, clarifying meaning in a script that had no punctuation, no vowels and no spaces. Writing in ancient Egypt was like solving a riddle, painted in ink and carved in stone. Oh, and don't assume it always runs left to right, or even horizontally. Egyptian scribes could write top to bottom, right to left, or vice versa, depending on what felt right. The clue: look at the way the animals are facing. If the bird stares left, you read left. If it faces right, follow it. If it's upside down, good luck. This wasn't a skill for just anyone. Literacy was rare. Maybe 1% of Egyptians could read or write. To join that elite club, you had to become a scribe, and that meant years of brutal education starting in childhood. You memorized hundreds of symbols, copied texts until your hands cramped, and if you survived the training, the reward was worth it. Scribes were respected, well-fed, and spared the sun-scorched labor of brick hauling and field work. They were the bureaucrats, the historians, the tax collectors, and the magicians of the written word.
To most Egyptians, writing was more than a tool. It was divine. His. To write someone's name was to give their soul eternal life. To erase it was to destroy their afterlife completely. So spelling errors, not just embarrassing, potentially catastrophic. These weren't emoji, they were spells, packed with power, myth, and mystery. And after 14 chapters of sand, sweat, labor, death, and devotion, you have to ask the question: could you survive even one day in ancient Egypt? Probably not. It's easy to romanticize the past. Golden tombs, lotus-scented rituals, beautiful hieroglyphs and wise gods with jackal heads and hawk eyes. But beneath the beauty was something far less forgiving. Life for the average Egyptian was grueling. Your day began on a dirt floor, your body swarmed by flies. You worked barefoot on searing sand, hauled water, cooked over open flames, and shared your home with goats, smoke and dust. You feared plague, famine and curses. You had no toothpaste, no aspirin, and if you were lucky, 2 sets of linen for a lifetime. You obeyed a god-king who could seize your land with a word. You worshipped a pantheon that demanded not just belief but performance, rituals, offerings, and perfection. And when you died, you faced a divine courtroom where your soul was weighed on a cosmic scale. Mess it up, and you were fed to a monster. There was no middle class, no career ladder, no reinvention. You were born into your role: a farmer, a laborer, a servant, a mother, and that was it. And yet, the Egyptians weren't bitter. They believed in the beauty of life. They celebrated with music, dance, feasts, and festivals. They painted, they laughed, they dreamed of eternity, and built monuments so massive and enduring that we're still talking about them 3,000 years later. Would you last a day in their world? Probably not, but they lasted millennia, and maybe that's why they still echo in ours. It was never just a temple. It was a machine of myth and meaning, a cosmic engine designed to tether the heavens above, the earth below, and the shadowed underworld between them. Through ritual, through sacrifice, through stone and blood, the temple of the feathered serpent at Teotihuacan pulsed with purpose. Every jagged obsidian blade, every snarling serpent carved into the walls, every human life offered, all of it fed this spiritual mechanism. The people of Teotihuacan did not simply worship the feathered serpent. They mirrored his contradictions: wisdom and violence, fertility and destruction, beauty and fear. Their devotion wasn't quiet. It was structured, sacred, and terrifying. For centuries, the temple sat cloaked in silence, weathered by sun, wind, and time, half consumed by the earth. Locals passed by whispering stories. Scholars made maps and speculations, but no one could have guessed what truly lay beneath those ancient stones until archaeologists broke ground in the late 1980s. And again in the 2000s. What they uncovered was not just surprising, it was unsettling. Beneath the temple's core,
Archaeologists found a network of sealed chambers and pits, and within them, human remains laid with chilling precision. These were not chaotic battlefield dead. These were offerings, sacrifices, calculated, ceremonial, and cold. Over 200 victims, most of them young men between 15 and 25 years old, were discovered. Some were adorned with grisly jewelry, necklaces made of human jawbones. Others had their hands bound behind their backs. A few had been decapitated. Scattered among them were obsidian knives, black as a starless night, the tools of ritual slaughter, and the way the bodies were arranged told its own story.
They weren't buried at random. They followed a cosmic logic, arranged in quadrants, aligned with the cardinal directions, mirroring the universe as the Teotihuacanos understood it. Even the numbers mattered. A sacred mathematics of blood. Each death wasn't just a loss. It was a meaningful transaction. These weren't punishments. They were offerings. The young men were likely warriors, chosen not to perish in shame, but to be transformed through death. Their sacrifice consecrated the temple itself. Jaguar bones, serpent skeletons, rare shells from distant shores, figurines, obsidian blades that had never seen battle. These surrounded the dead like votive whispers. Every object had purpose. Every life taken was a layer of spiritual mortar, and the deeper the archaeologists dug, the more sacrifice they found. In one chamber, they discovered a shimmering tunnel filled with mercury and mica, materials linked to the underworld in ancient belief. The tunnel floor glittered like water, like a celestial river beneath the earth. Was it a symbolic passage to the afterlife, a mirror of the night sky, or perhaps both? The deeper the team went, the more it became clear the temple wasn't built atop death. It was built to contain it. Every drop of blood spilled wasn't incidental. The stone was meant to absorb it. But even more astonishing was the architecture's cosmic precision. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent isn't just a building, it's a statement. It doesn't simply sit on the land. It aligns with the stars. The entire city of Teotihuacan was engineered along sacred lines. The main avenue of the dead, the city's spine, runs at a 15-degree offset from true north. This was no mistake. Scholars believe it may have been aligned with the setting of the Pleiades or the sunrise on significant ritual dates. The temple itself anchors this axis, locked into a celestial blueprint. Why? Some argue it's aligned with the equinox sunrise. Others say it was built to track Venus, the most sacred of planets in Mesoamerican belief. Venus meant war, sacrifice, rebirth. Its movements weren't merely observed. They dictated ritual and power. When Venus rose, so did the knives. Even the temple's design tells a story in numbers. The repetition of 7, the number of visible planetary bodies, appears in its stepped platforms. Its geometry pulses with rhythm, symmetry, and a staggering awareness of both earthly math and celestial mechanics. And beneath it all, secrets kept deep in the bones of the earth. In 2003, researchers uncovered a tunnel beneath the temple, but it wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a crafted world. Its walls were lined with powdered pyrite, a mineral that reflects light like starlight. Mercury pools shimmered in the dark. Walking through it would have been like moving through the Milky Way, a symbolic journey through the underworld, or toward divine rebirth. This temple wasn't just a place of worship. It was a portal, a cosmic interface, a calendar, a sanctuary, and a theater for gods. Teotihuacanos believed time was circular. Buildings, sacrifices, rituals, none were singular acts. They were cycles. Death begat life. Blood nourished the cosmos. And the temple's design wasn't just to observe the stars, it was to speak to them. But it was more than religion. It was political theater. To stand before the Temple of the Feathered Serpent 1,800 years ago was to feel your place in the cosmos and in society. If you were a visiting dignitary from a neighboring city-state, your arrival would take you down the Avenue of the Dead, where the scale of the city itself humbled you. But at the temple you would stop cold. Massive serpent heads leered from the stone, fanged mouths, eyes of cold obsidian, jaguar symbols prowled across the facade. This was not subtle, it was deliberate.
The plaza outside had once hosted mass gatherings, ceremonies where life and death were enacted in public. Sacrifices were staged with ritual flair. Priests donned feathered cloaks and obsidian masks, chanting to drumbeats, spilling blood beneath the serpent's gaze. It wasn't just to appease the gods, it was to display power. The elite rulers of Teotihuacan didn't just claim divine favor, they demonstrated it. They alone could summon rain, predict eclipses, and barter with the heavens. Even the architecture obeyed the script. From the temple's upper tiers, the elite could look down upon the masses. The people looked up, at their rulers, their gods, and the blood that fed both. Teotihuacan didn't conquer with swords. It conquered with awe. Outsiders returned home with tales of impossible scale and unshakable faith. They spoke of serpents carved in stone, of death rituals that turned the sky red. Teotihuacan presented itself not just as a city, but as the axis of the universe. Place where gods walk the earth. And then, it ended. Around 550 CE, the great engine faltered. The fall was neither swift nor silent. Cracks had begun to form long before. Droughts came, crops failed, the priest-king's power waned. The celestial order they had so carefully maintained began to unravel. Then came the fire. Across the city's sacred core, the temples, the elite compounds, archaeologists found layers of ash, signs of deliberate destruction. The lower-class neighborhoods were largely untouched. This wasn't an invasion from outside. It was a revolt from within. The people who once watched the sacrifices with reverence may have turned against their rulers. The temple of the feathered serpent, once the beating heart of cosmic authority, was defaced. Statues were smashed, fires were lit, sacred spaces were reduced to rubble. And then, silence. The city wasn't completely abandoned, not at first, but its spirit was extinguished. The trade routes dried up, the rituals stopped, the elite vanished. The temple no longer sang to the stars, and yet the story didn't end there. Centuries later, the Aztecs would stumble upon Teotihuacan's ruins. Struck with awe, they believed gods had built this place. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. They didn't know who had created it, but they felt its power. They revered it. They wove it into their own myths. To them, the temple of the feathered serpent wasn't a ruin, it was a relic. A testament to something ancient and divine. But the irony lingers. The most powerful city of its age, one that lived by the stars and died in fire, left behind no written record, no final decree, just stone, just questions. For over 1,000 years the temple lay buried, under ash, dust, and the silence of memory, until we came digging.
Modern archaeology pried open its bones in the 20th century. And in 2011, one of the most haunting discoveries was made: a sealed tunnel beneath the temple, closed for nearly 1,800 years, as if to keep something sacred or dangerous forever hidden. Inside, a corridor of stars, walls glinting with pyrite, pools of mercury, thousands of objects, jade statues, rubber balls, obsidian blades, wooden masks. It wasn't a tomb, it was a message. A ritual cosmos preserved in stone. Some believe it was used for royal initiations. Others say it symbolized creation itself, the mythic cave where gods were born, where order emerged from chaos. Even the mercury, once seen only as poison, may have been symbolic, liquid, shimmering, otherworldly, a veil between the human and the divine. And through all of it, the feathered serpent remains, coiled not just in carvings or murals, but in the very architecture, in the ritual logic of the city, a presence, a riddle. With every excavation, with every unearthed jawbone or glinting artifact, we move closer to understanding, but the temple still keeps its secrets. Today, tourists wander the site, children run past the stone serpent heads, but beneath their feet lies a world built on blood and vision, a city that once sought to bind the stars. And the temple still watches, waiting. It was the ritual, the sacred pulse that bound communities to their ancestors, the earth, and to one another. And then came the drums, not merely instruments, but vessels of language, spirit, and memory. In the heartlands of West Africa, the talking drums echoed across savannas and forests. Their tones mimicked the cadences of human speech, carrying intricate messages over vast distances. Villagers understood every rise and fall in pitch, births, deaths, celebrations and warnings, traveling from one community to the next. Long before the invention of the telephone, it was a rhythmic telegraph, precise and deeply human. Across the ocean among Native American tribes, the drum was not a tool. It was a living presence. It pulsed with the heartbeat of Mother Earth herself. In sacred ceremonies it called upon ancestors, summoned healing, and guided the souls of the departed. The large powwow drum played by a circle of hands wasn't just musical, it was spiritual, creating a heartbeat shared between people, land and sky. In those circles, time ceased, bodies swayed, spirits awakened, and voices rose not in song, but in reverence. Half a world away, in the sunburned lands of Australia, the Aboriginal peoples tapped out the rhythms of the Dreamtime, the mythic era of creation, using clapsticks and foot stomps. Their movements were more than dance. They were acts of ancestral remembrance. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans beat frame drums during long dark winters, not to entertain but to survive. The rhythms opened gateways, conjuring visions and drawing spirits into their icy shelters. These were not performances, these were lifelines, expressions of story, identity, and faith. To drum was to belong, to drum was to remember, always. It was communal, no notes, no stage, just hands on skin, earth underfoot, and hearts beating in unison. Wherever you stood on earth, if you heard a drum in the distance, you knew something sacred was unfolding, something that words alone could never hold. But the drum's voice would not always be gentle. As humanity marched into the age of empires, drums were drafted into darker service. They became instruments of command, domination, and fear. The battlefield became their new altar. In ancient China, enormous war drums, known as bo, were struck to issue orders across open plains. A single booming strike could signal a charge, a retreat, or a sudden flank. Amid the chaos of battle, these beats were lifelines, and trained ears could distinguish them through blood and steel. In Mesopotamia, drums once used to announce the divine presence of rulers now thundered through walled cities in times of war. Their relentless rhythm shook enemy hearts, broadcasting power and stirring fear. In Rome, the tympanum beat during religious processions and imperial rituals, evoking the grandeur of the gods and the empire itself. But no army wielded the drum with such theatrical force as the Ottomans. Their meter bands, the world's first military orchestras, marched into battle unleashing a storm of kettle drums, curse, deep bass, devils and clashing cymbals. The effect was overwhelming. European soldiers reported freezing in terror, paralyzed before even laying eyes on the advancing force. The Ottomans knew sound was strategy, rhythm could conquer. Yet power wasn't only projected on the battlefield. In royal courts from Africa to Asia, drums declared the presence of kings. They marked coronations, summoned courts, and framed political rituals. To beat a drum was to declare, power is here. Even in bondage, drums did not fall silent. In the Americas, enslaved Africans used rhythm to resist and remember. On plantations, hidden beats passed secret messages, organized rebellion, and preserved culture. The drum became defiance. It survived the whip, outlasted the chains. In rhythm they endured, wherever it sounded on thrones, in war camps, or in whispered ceremonies. The drum carried a message. This is who we are. This is who rules. This is the rhythm of power. As civilizations diverged, so did their rhythms. In the East, the drum evolved into an instrument of precision, ceremony, and spirituality. In the West, it was militarized, structured, and eventually refined into orchestral form. Two philosophies, two destinies, one heartbeat. In India, the tabla rose to divine prominence, with crisp tones and fluid complexity. It wasn't merely rhythm, it was language. Every stroke bore a syllable, each phrase a sentence in an ancient tongue of vibration. A tabla player was not a drummer, but a poet of percussion, trained for decades to speak the sacred dialect of time. In Japan, the taiko drum thundered in temples and on stages alike, played in Shinto rituals and martial performances. The taiko was more than music, it was embodiment. The drummer's stance mirrored that of a warrior, grounded and precise. Its booming voice called gods down from mountain tops and banished malevolent spirits into the wind. In Indonesia, the kendang led the intricate dance of the gamelan orchestra, guiding dancers and worshippers through swirling layers of celestial rhythm. Every strike told a story of balance, harmony, and spiritual flow. By contrast, Europe's drums remained utilitarian for centuries. In the medieval era, they signaled time, summoned troops, and enforced order. Not until the Renaissance and Baroque periods did they inch into formal music. Even then, they lingered at the back, beneath fanfare, under cathedral arches, loud but never leading. This divergence exposed a deeper truth. While the East saw rhythm as art and meditation, the West forged it into command and structure. Still, both understood its core power: to bind time, to stir the soul, to lift ritual into the divine. And so, from mountain temples to desert fires, from Arctic rituals to cathedral choirs, the drum remained the bridge between the earthly and the eternal. Long before holy books were inked, rhythm was already a sacred scripture. It didn't require translation, it required presence. In Africa's Yoruba tradition, the bata drum was a divine voice. Its beats invoked the orishas, the gods of nature and spirit. Drummers, trained from childhood, were spiritual mediators. Every rhythm had a function, every beat was a prayer. In Hinduism, the god Shiva dances with the damaru, an hourglass-shaped drum. Its beat is the origin of sound and language, the pulse that awakens creation from the void. In Buddhism, the soft tapping of the ritual frame drum guides monks in meditation, not to stir the body, but to center the mind. It anchors the breath, a spiritual metronome. In the Americas, indigenous drums guided vision quests and healing ceremonies. The beat mimicked the womb, the first sound we ever heard, returning seekers to a place of primal connection. Here, rhythm wasn't accompaniment, it was the prayer. Even in Christianity, where rhythm was often subdued, the drum found its place. In gospel churches, especially in African American traditions, the drum became the soul's amplifier, expressing praise, pain, hope, and triumph. Behind every hymn, a heartbeat, because when language ends, rhythm remains, and the divine always listens. For millennia, drums were singular, one body, one skin, one soul. But in the industrial age, percussion evolved. Factories, dance halls, and theaters birthed something new, a revolution of rhythm. The modern drum kit was born not from art, but necessity. In the 1800s, theater and military bands required multiple percussionists to play bass drums, snares, cymbals, all separately. But stages were small, and budgets smaller, so drummers began to combine them into one playable machine. By 1909, the first foot-operated bass drum pedal changed everything. One drummer could do it all, and from that invention rose a throne, a seat from which a single musician could command a whole percussion section. Then came jazz. In smoky clubs and Chicago basements, the drum kit came alive. Jazz drummers didn't just keep time, they played around it. Syncopation, swing, accents. This was rhythm with attitude. Artists like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich turned the drum into a voice of rebellion, sophistication, and soul. As jazz morphed into rock, the kit grew, bigger, louder, more primal. The 60s and 70s birthed drummers like John Bonham and Keith Moon, who shattered expectations and eardrums. Multiple toms, double bass pedals, splash cymbals. These kits were machines of fury and finesse. Today, the drum kit is everywhere. In gospel churches and punk garages, EDM festivals and global tours. Even as digital drums rise, the raw energy of sticks on skin endures. The drum kit is not a relic, it is a throne of expression. And still, across the world, drums beat in 1,000 dialects. From the sharp slaps of the West African djembe, to the conversational rhythms of the dun-dun, these drums speak in communal cadence. They don't just make music, they carry history. In the Middle East,
The darbuka delivers crisp rolling rhythms, essential to belly dance and folk traditions. Across Latin America, the conga, bongo, and timba sing of resilience, rebellion, and joy. In Cuba, the bata still whispers sacred syllables to the orishas. In Brazil, the surdo and cuca drive samba parades that blend protest, celebration, and prayer. In India, the mishradangam and tabla articulate rhythm with such precision, they blur the line between beat and melody. Each finger is a storyteller, each strike a centuries-old whisper. And then there is the frame drum, one of humanity's oldest instruments. From the Persian daf to the Irish bodhran, from shamanic rites to folk gatherings, it has persisted. Light, portable, powerful, played with fingers, mallets, or hands, it is rhythm stripped to essence. The drum, in all its forms, continues to echo across continents and centuries, a universal language carved in wood, stretched in hide, and spoken in beat. It was always more than rhythm. It was and still is the heartbeat of humanity. Their rhythms echo through geography, history, and identity. The global drum family isn't just vast, it's universal. From the djembe in West Africa to the taiko in Japan, the world has always moved to a beat. And as we saw in the last chapter, rhythm wasn't just a sound, it was a language, a heartbeat, a form of memory. But as the 20th century drew to a close, that pulse began to shift, not in tempo, but in texture. The beat, once conjured by calloused hands in carved wood, began to fuse with circuits, screens, and algorithms. A new chapter in percussion had begun, the digital age. It all started quietly in the 1970s, with machines that barely sounded like drums at all. Early analog devices like the Rhythmicon and the Roland CR78 produced mechanical robotic pulses. To some, they were awkward curiosities, more science experiment than musical tool. But to visionary artists, these machines offered something profound: consistency, control, and a boundless sonic frontier. Then came the thunderclap that changed everything.
In 1980, Roland unveiled the TR-808. At first it was a commercial failure. Too synthetic, too strange, but in the underground, it found a home. That deep throbbing kick and its crisp biting snare became the backbone of entire genres. Hip-hop, electro, techno, and trap. Suddenly, it wasn't about imitating acoustic drums anymore. It was about inventing new sonic realities. As music production evolved, so did the tools. Electronic drum kits, like Roland's V-drums, gave performers a new kind of freedom. Drummers could play naturally, while triggering thousands of sounds, all programmable and infinitely customizable. They could rehearse in silence, record without microphones, and conjure entire drum kits with a single tap. Then came the rise of digital audio workstations, DAWs like Ableton Live, Florida Studio, and Logic Pro. Suddenly, a bedroom producer with a laptop had access to power once reserved for million-dollar studios. Kicks, snares, hi-hats, sub-bass, all layered, sculpted, and arranged into vast digital landscapes. Finger drumming, once a novelty, became an art form of its own. Pads lit up like constellations under nimble fingers. And though some feared this digital tide would wash away traditional drumming, the opposite happened. A new kind of fusion emerged. Acoustic drummers wired up their kits with triggers and pads. Producers layered machine beats with real percussion. The human and the mechanical began to groove together. Digital drums didn't erase tradition, they reimagined it. Today, a single artist in a small room can conjure rhythms that once required entire orchestras. Ancient African polyrhythms, South American grooves, Indian tabla patterns. They can all be sampled, remixed, reborn on neon-lit dance floors. The tools have evolved, but the purpose remains eternal: to move the body, to shape time, to make silence speak. The drum has never been just an instrument. It is our most primal voice. It's there in the birthing room, our mother's heartbeat, the first rhythm we ever hear. It follows us through every chapter of life. War drums in battle, sacred rhythms in ceremony, bass lines in celebration. It lives in city streets, in protest marches, in football stadiums, and in the hands of a child, banging pots with pure joyful instinct. Even artificial intelligence is learning rhythm, but no machine can replicate the soul behind an imperfect beat, because rhythm isn't just counted, it's felt. It lives in our bones, our breath, our blood. The drum has outlasted empires and genres, because it connects us to each other, to our past, and to something bigger than ourselves. It reminds us we are here, together, now. And as rhythm echoed through time, it found a new home, not in the earth but in the sky. Before Manhattan became a forest of steel and glass, it was an island of shadows cast not by towers, but by church steeples and wooden rooftops. In the early 1800s, New York City clung to the southern tip of the island like a stubborn barnacle. Streets were muddy, buildings rarely reached higher than 6 stories, and ambition was always at war with gravity. Back then, to build high was to build heavy. Stone and brick demanded thick walls and massive foundations. Each added floor meant exponentially more weight, so the city sprawled outward, not upward, following a bold new street grid planned in 1811. It was one of the most audacious urban blueprints of its time, laying the bones of a city that hadn't yet dreamed of the sky. But beneath that grid, silent and waiting, was Manhattan's secret weapon: bedrock. Deep, dense granite, a hidden spine strong enough to carry dreams taller than anyone had yet dared to imagine. The skyline, for now, was humble. Commerce filled the harbor, ships lined the piers, horses clattered down cobbled roads. The tallest structure was Trinity Church, whose spire rose a then astonishing 280 feet above Broadway. It stood as a spiritual and physical beacon, a symbol of faith and aspiration. But even that was more poetry than engineering. What no one yet knew was that the skyline of the future wouldn't be sculpted by stone or faith. It would be forged in steel, and it wouldn't be held down by the ground. It would soar far above it. For centuries, gravity had been architecture's gatekeeper. It kept cities low, ambition grounded. But in the mid-19th century, 2 inventions cracked open the sky. The first arrived in 1852, courtesy of Elisha Otis. At the New York Crystal Palace exhibition, Otis stood atop a platform suspended high above the crowd. In a moment of showmanship, he ordered the rope to be cut. The crowd gasped, but the platform didn't fall. His revolutionary safety brake kicked in, locking the elevator in place. In a single breathless moment, Otis made vertical movement safe. For the first time in history, the top floors became desirable. Light, air, and views replaced stairs and sweat. Elevators made height not only possible, but profitable. But people weren't the only things that needed lifting. Buildings still depended on heavy load-bearing walls, thicker and more cumbersome with each floor. That's when the second revolution arrived: the steel skeleton. In the 1880s and 90s, architects began using steel frames to hold the weight of buildings. Exterior walls became curtains, light, ornamental, and free of structural burden. Suddenly, height wasn't an engineering nightmare. It was a canvas, and Manhattan was the perfect place to paint. With bedrock ready, money flowing, and a skyline yet to be claimed, New York embraced the vertical future. The first contenders rose in the 1890s. In 1890, the New York World Building climbed 20 stories, making headlines as the tallest office building on Earth. But the crown didn't sit still. 9 years later, the Park Row Building reached 391 feet. Each new tower was a declaration of progress, power, and pride. By the dawn of the 20th century, the skyline was no longer an idea. It was a contest. The Singer Building took the lead in 1908, its 612-foot height eclipsing Trinity Church after 50 years. But even that wouldn't hold for long. In 1913, the Woolworth Building soared to 792 feet, 55 stories of neo-Gothic majesty, designed by Cass Gilbert, and paid in cash by five-and-dime King Frank Woolworth. It was more than a building. It was a cathedral to capitalism, a vertical sermon preaching America's rise as a modern superpower. This wasn't just architectural ambition,
It was branding warfare. Skyscrapers weren't just structures. They were symbols. Their silhouettes became logos. Their heights, headlines. Corporations staked their claim in the clouds, and beneath the steel and stone, the rhythm of progress thundered on. Riveters pounded beams, steam shovels carved granite, and immigrant workers risked everything, balancing on narrow girders hundreds of feet above the ground. By the 1920s, the skyline wasn't just climbing, it was dancing. Art Deco swept through Manhattan, and architecture became jazz in stone and steel. Geometry, elegance, and movement transformed the skyline into something dazzling. And then, in 1930, a building rose that changed everything. The Chrysler Building. The Art Deco style captured the contradictions of its era. Geometric yet graceful, forward-looking yet rooted in mythology. These were not just towers of steel and stone. They were sculpted monuments, glowing like celestial beacons in the night. At first glance, they dazzled with ornament and optimism, but beneath all that shine was intention. These buildings were erected not just by businessmen, but by barons and moguls chasing something bigger than profit. They wanted permanence, legacy, a place not only in the skyline but in history. By the close of the 1930s, Manhattan had etched a new silhouette into the clouds. No longer just a financial capital, it had become a cathedral of ambition, a skyline that didn't whisper progress, it shouted it. But as the world shifted after World War II, so too did the skyline. Ornament gave way to order. The delicate flourishes of Art Deco were replaced by glass, steel, and relentless symmetry. America had emerged as a global superpower, and New York was its front office. The city's architecture adjusted its posture, not to inspire awe, but to declare control. In 1952, the United Nations headquarters rose like a command center on the East River, a boxy glass tower flanked by austere marble wings. It wasn't just a building, it was a manifesto, a modernist vision of global diplomacy and atomic age cooperation. Soon other icons of the international style followed. The Lever House and the Seagram Building stripped away decoration, embracing a cold precision that defined mid-century modernism. The Seagram Building, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, became a landmark of this new ethos. Its bronze-tinted glass and open plaza rejected the ornamental past. No flourishes, no myths, just rhythm, rigor, and restraint. These weren't cathedrals. They were machines, beautiful, but ruthless. Midtown transformed into a gleaming battlefield of commerce. Skyscrapers no longer competed for beauty but for dominance. Square footage, location, presence. Where once spires soared mirrored monoliths now loomed silent titans, reflecting not just clouds, but the ambitions of Wall Street. And yet, even in their cool detachment, these towers carried meaning. They told a story of a country obsessed with progress and precision, a corporate era defined not by dreams but by discipline. Still, the city's skyline was far from finished. By the late 1960s, Manhattan had become a vertical masterpiece. But there was still room for something audacious. At the southern tip of the island, a new vision was taking shape, one that would change the skyline forever. They came as a pair, bold, monolithic, unapologetic, the Twin Towers.
Conceived as a global hub of commerce, the World Trade Center project was a feat of scale and symbolism. Overseen by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and designed by architect Minoru Yamasaki, the towers embraced radical minimalism, aluminum-clad exteriors, no setbacks, pure vertical lines. At 1,368 and 1,362 feet, they dwarfed every structure before them. But the ambition was deeper than height. It was ideological, a new temple for global capitalism, a monument to connectivity. To build them, engineers had to perform miracles. The site was soft riverbed, and to carve foundations they invented the slurry wall technique, a groundbreaking method that held back the Hudson while they dug deep into the earth. Entire neighborhoods were demolished, including the beloved Radio Row. It was sacrifice for vision. When the towers opened in 1973, opinions were split. Critics called them sterile, boxy. The artistry of the past was mourned, but for others the towers were power made manifest, uncompromising, symmetrical, bold, Unlike the Chrysler's glimmer or the Empire State's tapering elegance, the Twin Towers didn't dance with the sky. They stood like titans, absolute, unblinking. Over time, they became more than just buildings. They were icons. People from all over the world visited the observation decks, dined at windows on the world, or stood in the plaza below, dwarfed and awestruck. For nearly 30 years they anchored Lower Manhattan, twin columns of certainty in a skyline that never stopped evolving. Then came the day that broke the world. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, the towers vanished in fire and ash. In less than 2 hours, the unthinkable happened. The very pillars that once defined the southern skyline crumbled into a smoldering void. It wasn't just an attack on buildings. It was an attack on what they symbolized: global trade, modernity, freedom, ambition. In their absence, Lower Manhattan became hollowed. The skyline fractured. Images of the city felt ghostly. The familiar outline, so long a symbol of strength, was wounded. Where there had been height, there was only silence. Ground Zero became a sacred scar, and for the first time in over a century, New York stopped building upward. It grieved. But New York, even in mourning, does not surrender. Rescue became recovery. Rubble cleared. Lives honored. For months the city held its breath, a long pause in a place that never sleeps. Yet even in pain, New Yorkers looked up. Slowly, the questions came. Should anything rise here again? Could anything? Years passed before answers emerged. In 2003, architect Daniel Lubskin's master plan was chosen, not to rebuild what was lost, but to reimagine, to honor the past while shaping the future. This wasn't just architecture, it was identity, legacy, defiance. A layered space of glass, steel, memorials and memory. At its heart, a new tower began to rise. One World Trade Center, originally called the Freedom Tower. Its height, 1,776 feet, was no coincidence. It was a declaration, a deliberate echo of 1776. The year of American independence. Construction began in 2006. It opened in 2014. Unlike its predecessors, One World Trade doesn't seek grandeur through ornament. Clad in reflective glass, it becomes the sky, changing with the weather, glowing, vanishing, reappearing. It is solemn, proud, a monument, not just to resilience, but to rebirth. Beside it, the 9/11's memorial opened in 2011. Two vast voids where the towers once stood. Waterfalls descend endlessly, names of the fallen etched into bronze. It is not merely part of the skyline, it is part of the city's soul. As the years unfolded, the skyline continued to evolve. 3 WTC, 4 WTC, 7 WTC, sleek, modern, mindful. Together they didn't just replace what was lost, they transformed it. The skyline, like the city itself, honored the past while daring toward the future. And yet, it wasn't finished. The vertical race shifted once more, this time northward. Midtown became the new frontier. Along Billionaire's Row, ultra-thin residential towers now pierce the clouds. 432 Park Avenue, Central Park Tower, 111, West 57th Street. These are pencil towers, narrow, wind-braced marvels of engineering, monuments of wealth and aspiration. Critics call them absurd, sky-piercing symbols of inequality. Others see brilliance, testaments to what's structurally possible when ambition meets money. Meanwhile, on the far west side, an entirely new neighborhood has risen. Hudson Yard, a forest of gleaming towers, public art, and corporate command centers, built atop an active rail yard. It expands the skyline, not just up, but out. Yet through it all, the past holds fast. The Empire State still lights the night. The Chrysler still gleams with morning sun, and One World Trade stands, tall and unwavering. In truth, no statue or monument defines New York like its skyline does, because in those jagged lines and towering forms lies the story of millions, engineers, immigrants, dreamers, and doers. It's a silhouette that never stops shifting, never stops striving. A skyline that doesn't just mark where the city ends, but where human dreams begin. Because in Manhattan, the sky has never been the limit. It's just the next floor,